Hey everyone, welcome to my new show, Basil's Shorts. In Basil's Shorts, what we're going to be doing is videotaping the reading of an audiobook. Just a short story, just something small, 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes at the most, produced by various different audiobook narrators and original shorts that have been written by award-winning authors or other people, whoever may be able to present something that's pretty good, I hope. Today's first episode is titled, Leonard and the Cave of Wonders, 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 Wonders. Anyway, it's a short story that I wrote in response to a blog post that was like a writing competition kind of thing, a writing challenge called the 3-word exercise, where they would put 3 words up on the screen and you make a story based on these 3 unrelated words. Well, on the blog post, it had 7 different options of 3 words each, which are these words that come right up here. One was a priest, a skin rash, a cell phone GPS mistake, a singing competition, a family ring, and an overprotective grandmother, an abandoned farmhouse, breast augmentation, and a lumpy mattress, a malfunctioning elevator, a pickpocket, and a mother's last will, a stolen laptop, a favorite love song, and a wager, pink eye, a get-well card, and a run with someone famous, a funeral, a missing cat, and a promise. So they had these 7 options with 3 words in each option and said, pick one of those categories and write me a short story. Well, I just couldn't resist, so what I ended up doing was I picked all 21 of the words. So, as we're going along in this story, see if you can pick out all 21 of these words, which I'll actually have the words down in the comments or down in the description as well, and see if you can pick out all 21 of these words and check them off as they go along. See if I got it right and let me know what you think. Did I succeed? Was the story sensible? Did I get David Tennant's accent correct? I don't know. You be the judge. Have a wonderful, enjoyable story. See you on the other side. Leonard stepped out of the Cave of Wonders and scanned the area. He grasped at the device that hung on a chain around his neck. The sonic screwdriver, as Cecil called it, was actually, as far as Leonard could tell, little more than a tire pressure gauge retooled into a pocket-sized air horn. He didn't know what use he'd have for it, but Cecil insisted that he take it on every trip. He glanced down at the GPS in his other hand and let out a sigh. It seemed like a good idea at the time, he said aloud, as the blank GPS screen stared back at him with a look that said, "Don't look at me. I'm not your mother. I'm just an inanimate piece of 21st century technology that goes bing when I find something I think is interesting." On his cousin Cecil's advice, he had used that particular GPS to navigate the Cave of Wonders in hopes of arriving at a more precise location. The particular model of GPS Cecil insisted on, other than being the most expensive, included a live link to the World Wide Web. The Cave of Wonders, for those who may be curious, is a time machine. Cecil built it in his garage, using plans he'd bought from a slightly mysterious man at a Doctor Who convention. Before he had completed the machine, a man in a dress shirt and bow tie stole the laptop with the plans on it, leaving him to guess on the last few components. While the Cave of Wonders did look similar to a relatively famous police call box, and the inside was indeed bigger than the outside, that is pretty much where the similarities end. Leonard liked to think of himself as a time traveler, but since wool scarves made his skin break out in a rash, he declined to put himself in the same category as his favorite Time Lord. As he spun into the space-time vortex, something occurred to him. There was always some missing factor when Cecil came up with a really cool idea. That factor, whatever it turned out to be at any specific moment, usually came to Leonard's attention sometime after he'd pressed the big red button. The particular factor relevant to the current situation happened to be that there were no GPS satellites in existence prior to 1978, which in turn meant that if heading to the past, when the vortex folded to a point before 1978, the numbers and the coordinates meant something completely different than what he otherwise might have thought when he entered them. Therefore, when the machine stopped and Leonard opened the door expecting to step out of the machine and into L.A. in August 1976 for a much-anticipated date with his beloved, the one and only bionic woman, yes, Lindsay Wagner, He instead flung open the door of the Cave of Wonders and walked directly into the fiery gaze of a Mayan priest, holding a man's still beating heart in one hand and a large crystal knife in the other. The blade, sparkling in the bright midday sun, cast rainbow hues onto a stone floor that glistened with fresh blood. The heart's previous owner gaped at Leonard as if he were an overprotective grandmother at a singing competition where the young man had wagered the family ring on his favorite love song and lost. The priest stared at Leonard wide-eyed, trying to decide if Leonard were a god or a man. He blinked and rubbed the back of his hands against his eyes, the whites of which were bright pink with infection. The swollen lids let out a squishy sound as he rubbed them. "You should do something about that pink eye," Leonard said to the priest. The priest said nothing in reply. The man on the table flapped his mouth open and shut several times as if trying to say something. He gave Leonard a pleading look, blinked several times, lifted his eyebrows imploringly. When Leonard did nothing, the man's eyes stretched so wide that it looked as if they would pop. He sucked in a final mortal breath, his face taut, raised his hands in supplication to the skies, shuddered, and in the moments before he slipped his mortal skein and ascended to the next reality, flipped Leonard the bird, and then he died. "Well," Leonard muttered, "don't expect a get-well card from me." A grunt sounded from near the man. Leonard stood frozen in place, eyes fixed on the scene. Unable to comprehend the whole thing, he waited to see what would happen next. The priest raised the still beating heart to his lips, eyes deeply shadowed, stared directly at Leonard. He paused, sniffed the bloody organ, then opened his mouth and bit a chunk out of it. A gush of blood dribbled down the corners of his mouth. Whether it was the look of wide-eyed horror at the sight of the priest chewing on a chunk of human heart, or the high-pitched screech Leonard loosed that sounded like a cross between a malfunctioning elevator and a breast-augmented actress in a C-movie horror flick, the priest seemed to take Leonard's reaction as something less than godly. The crystal knife blade sparkled in the bright sun as the priest flicked it his direction and issued a loud, guttural command that set a half-dozen large, intimidating minions advancing on Leonard. Wicked-looking hooked swords and long barbed spears pointed his direction. He twisted around to get back into the Cave of Wonders, only to find it blocked by two even larger and more intimidating minions. One wore a necklace of shrunken heads, the other earrings made of human ears. Their cheeks and foreheads had been scarred in the ancient tribal tattooing method that left their faces looking like lumpy mattresses. A third figure stepped out from behind the Cave of Wonders. He was tall, thin, and topped with a mop of mussed hair. A large leather satchel rested on his hip, its strap across his shoulder. He wore a blue suit and Nike running shoes. The outfit was accompanied with a crazed, wild-eyed expression that Leonard primarily associated with less than completely sane people. The man looked vaguely familiar. In his arms lay a cat, its tail swishing back and forth. The cat purred softly against the man's chest, then turned and looked at Leonard. "Hey!" Leonard shouted. "That's my mother's missing cat!" The man smirked at him, raised one eyebrow higher than seemed possible. "Is that so, Leonard? How do you know my name?" Recognition suddenly smacked Leonard upside the head, like an abandoned farmhouse collapsing under the weight of a heavy winter's snow. "Doctor?" "No," said the man. "Not the doctor anymore. I'm just plain old David Tennant. After those fools at BBC were done with me, they cast me off like an unfulfilled promise. But little did they know I would return as a real Time Lord." Sorry, I always wanted to do that laugh, but now that I've done it, it doesn't seem quite as fulfilling as I'd expected. "But what are you doing here, and now?" "It was my mother's last will, her dying wish, as it were, the final word of her final breath on her deathbed, in her coffin, at her funeral." Wait a minute. You're telling me that your mother spoke to you at her own funeral? "Quiet, little man. It's my story. David Tennant composed himself and continued. I had acquired real plans to build a real TARDIS, one that worked. But while speaking at a sci-fi conference, a pickpocket snatched them from me while I was engrossed in a bowl of fish fingers and custard. Don't see what Matt Smith sees in that stuff. It's disgusting. Anyway, by the time I realized what had happened, he sold them to some super nerdy little guy walking around with a satchel. It took a long time for me to find that man after the show, but I did. And by the time I did find him, I had an idea. You know what it was? Rather than build the machine myself, I'd let that schmuck do it on his own dime. Yeah. So I let your pitiful little cousin Cecil work on it for me. And then he built it with my plans, and I would steal the plans back for myself, steal the TARDIS, and take off into real time travel like I'd always wished I could on the show, you know what I mean? But then you, Leonard, you took the time machine on a test drive and never came back. It was now Leonard's turn to raise an eyebrow. He looked around uneasily at the bloodthirsty and butt-ugly minions who stared back at him, waiting, Leonard was sure, for David Tennant gone mad to give them the order to cut him open and eat his heart. Leonard's mind raced to find a plan, but all the plans were apparently faster than his mind, or perhaps they were on a different track altogether. "Why are you telling me this?" Leonard asked. "Because this is what washed-up television stars turn maniacal evil overlord masterminds do to save time in the script, you ninny. And this draws the show to a close when we do this. Don't you ever watch TV?" David Tennant said. "This is what we do right before we kill you." Leonard's throat tightened in the grip of a huge gulp that refused to go down with appropriate drama, instead bouncing back up as a squeaky burp. "You took off in my time machine, Leonard. My TARDIS." Sweat beaded and ran down Leonard's forehead, forming at the end of his eyebrows and dripping off as if from an overflowing gutter. He wiped at it with the back of his sleeve. "But I stole back the plans for the machine, my original plans," David Tennant said, "and stowed away on your precious little Cave of Wonders." Nice name, by the way, very creative. "Thank you. You're welcome." But why?" Leonard said. "Why stow away on my time machine when you've got the plans to build your own?" "Simple," David Tennant said with a condescending eye roll. "I do not wish to share the glory of space and time with you. You are not my ideal sidekick. I plan to leave you with these fine gentlemen here to do with you as they will. And I will take off in my TARDIS, find Rose, and travel the universe in search of adventure and long romantic walks on the beaches of sandy time." David Tennant stroked the cat's head, eliciting a fresh bout of purring. "All right," he said. "My rant is done. I've told the whole story. Even gotten in an evil wahaha laugh. It was very fun. And now it is time for you to die." David Tennant turned toward the Cave of Wonders, calling back over his shoulder, "He's yours." The lumpy mattress-faced men looked at Leonard with an expression that might have been a grin, but looked more like someone was trying to shove a dry corn cob into a place it was not intended to be shoved, following said action with a healthy dose of Tabasco sauce. Leonard had to think fast. He grasped the chain around his neck, fumbling with it in an effort to calm his trembling. His fingers brushed against the sonic screwdriver, and an idea hit him with a force equivalent to that of a 1-year-old baby demonstrating his dislike of broccoli by throwing the vegetables on the floor, then flattening them with a 200-pound hydraulic hammer. He gripped the pen-like device and jammed the little blue button on top with his thumb. A sound emanated out of that tiny device with a force best described as of biblical proportions. The sound created a visible wave that blew outward in an expanding sphere, knocked the lumpy mattress-faced men flat, and kept going. It threw the cat into the kind of panic that only cats can produce. It was the kind of high-pitched screech, razor-sharp claws, long pointy fangs bared, hair standing straight, tail rigid, eyes wide as cue balls, flesh-rending scramble panic that would have had over 10 billion hits on Facebook and started a whole new meme category called Demon Cats from Hell. David Tennant could not contain the cat. In a blur of fur, claws, and eyes, the screeching beast clambered up and over his head, leaving a bloody trail of claw marks across his face as it leaped 40 feet into the air where it hung in empty space. Suspended by sheer gravity-defying terror, the cat's eyes flitted back and forth, looking for the source of the sound, its face frozen in an expression that said, "Holy crap, if I wore pants, I'd have to change them." Leonard leaped over the lumpy mattress-faced men, shoved the bleeding David Tennant out of the way, and burst through the door of the Cave of Wonders, all in one swift motion. He slammed the door behind him and slapped his hand over the big red button. As the Cave of Wonders made the swishy, scrapey noises of time-space travel initiation, he heard a high, shrill voice screaming from the other side of the door. "I will find you, Leonard! And I will burgle from Mumble." Confused, Leonard looked out the window in the door of the machine and saw David Tennant transform into a 10-foot-tall, squid-like creature with no clothing other than a Nike running shoe on the end of each tentacle and a funny-looking bowler hat on what appeared to be its head. "Ah, there you are." The voice snapped Leonard's attention back from the window. He spun around, sonic screwdriver at the ready. Cat-like panic started to rise in his own gut, then suddenly let itself loose in the form of a small, squeaky fart. He glanced back out the window, back to the figure across the room, back to the window, back to the figure again. "Hi, I'm David Tennant," the man said. "Someone knocked me out and I woke up in there. Say, is this a real time machine? A real TARDIS?" Leonard nodded, dumbstruck. "Wow, I've always wondered if the spacey, wacy, timey-wimey thing was real." He reached for a toggle on the control panel and started to pull. Leonard snapped out of his daze. "No, don't touch!" Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Did you catch all 21 of the words? Did you mark them down? If you do, I'll give you 10 extra internet points, which you can use to redeem at any imaginary store that your kids make up for you. If you're interested in posting a short story right here on Basil Shorts, contact me at this email address right here, basil@sandmanproductionsak.com. I'd love to have you on if you're a narrator. Beginning narrator, experienced narrator, as long as you can do it well and do it right, let's have you on here. Find yourself a short story, give me a good video read, preferably with a green screen in the background if you can. If not, a nice view in the back would be fine, or even the back of your closet, as long as it's nothing like pornographic or anything like that, you know. Anyway, have a great rest of the day. This is Basil showing you my shorts. I'll see you later. Bye.